Hello, my name's Sonia Leon, and I'm the artist for Romeo and Juliet. Right now, I'm just roughing out the pencils for a sketch of Juliet. I think it's a lovely, melancholy picture of her, sort of holding her hair back from the wind, being a bit miserable, but um, it suits her. I like drawing hair in the wind, particularly long black hair, because it's has a lot of movement. But yeah, apologies if it's a little bit light, but obviously you can appreciate that if it's in the rough sort of pencil sketch stage, I don't really want it to be too prominent, otherwise it might show in the final piece. But you can see how I usually start all of my drawings with just a few rough guidelines here and there. I mean, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter whether you're a professional or an amateur or not. I always suggest guidelines, because that means you'll get it right first time rather than wander around in the dark. The style of shading that I use is very similar to watercolours in the way that I like to leave as much white and sort of blending as possible. So I often use very feathery strokes. Sometimes they vary from well, going from dark to light or from light to dark, but it really depends on how easily the markers can bleed a little bit. For super shiny highlights, I like playing around with high contrast sort of shading, where the point at which the reflection sort of ends, I have a very dark shadow which fades out into something lighter. So that's how I'm giving Juliet her super shiny hair. I do quite like these brushy tips. They're really nice for getting the sort of fine texture, getting the sort of feathery bits of the hair done. It's very nice. When working with markers, doing your inks with very fine liners can lead to some problems because naturally with markers there is always going to be some small aspect of bleed here and there. So be careful with using super thin lines. You may want to use a slightly thicker fine liner than ones you are used to for your general inking or your black and white work. You may also want to, for the purposes of style, use more sort of feathery strokes to build up the line width a little bit, to show some 3D sort of shading. Whenever I'm colouring hair or things with sort of like a shiny kind of texture, for example, I mean, in this case, you could consider Juliet's sort of kimono top to be made out of something that's quite silken. Do try to think about the direction in which the object that you're colouring is flowing in. I mean, particularly important for hair to make sure that the strands sort of like match with the way in which the hair is falling. But when you're working on clothes, and if you want to do a sort of more soft blended style like this, you need to think about the contouring. What areas are sort of rounded towards the source of light, and thinking in terms of 3D, how to shade cylinders, how to shade curves or general shapes, really. Another general tip for clothing is I have mentioned that it's good to think about the overall contouring of a person's shape, or the overall sort of shape of a costume. But fabric has creases and folds. Don't forget to leave highlights in these areas as well. And notice I use the word leave, and that's what we do. We don't when you're working with markers, you can't make something lighter. You have to start darker. No, you don't necessarily have to start darker, but you can't paint a highlight on top of something if you're using markers, unless you want to use white ink. But then again, that brings its own host of problems as well. It's much better if you want to give an overall impression of a super bright highlight to leave white those areas. So please take these into account as you're doing your colouring. Her corset is made up of green and yellow with patterns, and what I've chosen to do here to show the lighting conditions and the shading is to give the impression of this pattern and the shading with a pointillist sort of technique, where I use lots and lots of little dots that gradually sort of disperse out as something has more highlights, as something is closer to the light source.
End off.
End of.
End off.
End
That's
of.
it. That's it. Good stuff.